Hello everyone, this is DocuDays UA Film Festival. It is happening online these days and we have a set of online events devoted to the film from the program. My name is Alexander Tiluk, I'm a film researcher and the moderator of this event. Today, I'm really glad to introduce you to the film Becoming Animal and one of its directors, Emma Davie. Emma Davie is a documentary film director from Scotland, UK, the author of the I Am Breathing film and Becoming Animal and a couple of other festival-honored films. Her documentaries explores innovative approaches to narrative structure and the relation between form and ethic. She's also a programmer and a film scholar. Becoming Animal is a documentary by Emma Davie and Peter Mettler. It is a special screening of the DocuDays Film Festival. The film is available on the docuspace.org website. You are welcome to watch it there. Becoming Animal is a very interesting observation of nature with all the attitudes between the wild species and the humans, and with quotes of David Abram, who is a philosopher and environmentalist. According to Abram, ideas which were influenced by Gaia hypothesis, our nervous system is just a part of sensitive possibilities of all the life. And the film is an example of visual investigation on deep ecology ideas and the immersions to wild areas between visible and invisible, tangible and intangible. And I hope we will have an interesting talk about the film and on the one hand, Emma's interest to the environmental problem, and on the other hand, about the art form and film editing approach that Emma used in this film. Also, I would like to share with you our plan for next hour. Except our conversation, we will have 3 episodes from Becoming Animal that could illustrate the ideas of the film, which Emma decided to stress on. And in the end, we will have a time for questions and reflections. Thus, everyone from audience is very welcome to send us your thoughts, questions, and ideas. So, hello, Emma. Great to talk with you today, and thank you very much for the brilliant film you did. And I'm starting with my first question to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I really wish I could see you. I'm imagining you. And nice to feel your presence today.
Okay, Emma, I want to start maybe from David Abram person, because for the comprehension of the film, it's really important to know who is he, and because he is not very well known in Ukraine, unfortunately. So, as I know, the making of the film with David and Peter was originally your idea, but could you tell us more about this collaboration and about Abram person and about his ideas and how they engagement you?
Sure. Well, this book, which David is a writer from America who's also trained as an anthropologist and a magician. He's an incredible mix of disciplines. And he wrote a book about 15 years ago called Spell of the Sensuous, which is this book. And I read it and was completely bowled over by it at the time. I felt, for me, that it communicated problems and an understanding of our connection with what we call the natural world. And I'm always conscious when I'm using that term, that's already quite a charged term to use. But I think in this book, what David put forward was that our human connection with the world around us is a connection which for 99% of our time on this planet has been a connection which saw the human as part of an animistic world. So a world in which other beings, whether it's a tree or an animal or a blade of grass or whatever it is, that other beings have agency and other beings have the ability to communicate. And that for most of our time on this planet, we've credited beings with that agency. And as a result, we put our own position as human beings as very much immersed in that and as part of that, rather than seeing the world as a kind of foreground human-centric experience with nature as a kind of backcloth against which we have basically unfolded our dramas over the years. So David, in this book, unpicks really why it is the case that we've become so anthropocentric or so human-centric in our way of looking at things. And he uses really a wide array of methodologies and of structures of thought, whether it's from the philosophy of people like Merleau-Ponty, or whether it's from his travels in Nepal and Bali as a magician, where he encountered very different traditional ways of thinking and of seeing. And so in a way he collided all these different ways of looking and posited that actually perhaps it's the alphabet that made us, and our reliance on the written word, that made us almost blind to this other way of relating to what's around us. So that in a way we enter this more than human world as sort of automatons, unable to really use our full sensorial experience to relate to what's around. And I think when I read it, it felt like there was some kind of connection with something that I'd known maybe as a child, or something that maybe that I'd perceived as a child. And I don't know whether other people have had this experience, but I remember when I was very small, like maybe about 5 years old or something like that, having this sense that our relationship with nature, with the world around, in terms of the living planet, was a very strange one. I remember thinking when I was 7 or when I was 5 years old, thinking, or having a sense of feeling that there's something discombobulating about it, which mystified me. And I think it's also often things that mystify you that end up becoming themes for your work. So when I read David's book, it felt like there was both an explanation but also a deep questioning of what that dissonance was between us and the living world. I mean, we can talk later about this term nature, because obviously it's a loaded term, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm only seeing trees and mountains and the sky as nature. Obviously we're all part of nature, including our technological world, but we can come into that later. But I think this book, Spell of the Sensuous, was my first introduction to David, and the one that really blew my mind. And I think for quite a lot of us who were asking questions round about the time about really the environmental crisis that we were in, I think the book provided some kind of clues as to how we as artists and as filmmakers could maybe think differently and approach things differently. I didn't think of making a film about it, and then there's another book of David's that I read some years later, which is Becoming Animal, which was equally influential on my thinking. But yet again, I didn't think of making a film about it. It just certainly fed into something that I was interested in. Round about maybe 5-6 years ago, I went to a workshop that David was running in England, in Devon, where he was presenting his ideas. And the people in the workshop were such an interesting mix of people, ranging from psychologist, politician, artists, so a real complete array of people. And David presented his ideas and then in a way challenged us to go and experience and perceive what was around using some of the exercises that he suggested. And it was such a profound experience, I think, for many of us, that I found myself approaching David and saying, what would you think, David, of taking part in an experiment to see whether some of your ideas could actually translate into documentary film. And he was quite reluctant at first, and I think part of that reluctance was he'd had experience, or he'd certainly been approached by filmmakers before. And I think, like many writers, the precision of his written words really mattered to him. And as a philosopher, he was very conscious of how skeptical some people could be about his ideas, particularly those about animism. They're quite revolutionary ideas, and he was, I mean, he's actually in the book incredibly good at backing up the ideas. And film, as you know, can be very reductive because we have to edit so much. So I think he was conscious of all the pitfalls of being involved in a film. And I think that probably is what made him at first question it. But at the same time, he was intrigued. And maybe one of the things that intrigued him was that I always said right from the start, you know, we're not talking about illustrating your ideas, we're talking about taking part in an experiment. And I was bold enough to suggest that my good friend and film mentor, Peter Mettler, might also be keen on being part of this journey. Peter's work is incredibly visionary. For those of you who don't know it, I really recommend that you see his films. And he was actually my introduction to becoming a filmmaker many years ago, when he directed a film out of a play called Tectonic Plates, which I was in as an actress. And Peter's methodology, or Peter's approach to work, is very much about being alive to what's around, using technology as a sort of receiver to really open to what's being communicated by the world, rather than imposing something on it. So I felt that this mix of Peter's vision as a filmmaker and David's bold ideas would actually create something very interesting. And maybe just one more thing to say, Alexander, sorry if my answer is quite long, but maybe one more thing to say is that I felt as filmmakers that we had a big challenge facing the environmental disaster that we are. And it felt and feels as filmmakers that it's an incredibly difficult challenge to remotely approach the devastation without becoming overwhelmed by depression about what's happening. And I think both Peter and I were interested in trying to create work that didn't have that effect of just making us feel nihilistic and giving up. And we felt that there was some kind of energy in David's writing that suggested that actually the act of seeing itself and the act of perception could be a certain defiance against the devastation of so much of the effects of our actions in the past, but could also maybe suggest a clue as to why we are in the situation that we're in. So Peter and I had this phrase that maybe we'd used even before in our conversations as friends over the years, that maybe one of the reasons that we were facing what we were facing was because of a kind of crisis of perception. And by that I mean that in a way, what was it in how we saw and how we see the natural world that actually has given rise to the situation that we're in? So with that question, I think I'll shut up.
You have mentioned this approach, Peter's approach, when he used technology to show some environment situation. For me, film is also about the way of viewing and the distance between humans and the nature, and we can choose this distance. But how can we show the nature with the recording technology and trying to discover its feeling at the same time. How did you work with this paradox between using artificial technology and nature you wanted to understand?
I think this is a really good question, and I think the word paradox is probably the word that was the clue to it for us. I mean, we never wanted to pretend that we were making a David Attenborough film, as much as we all love David Attenborough. And I think we both felt that there was an alternative kind of nature film that we wanted to try and make. And that alternative kind of nature film, we wanted, instead of, if you imagine the frame that is normally used in nature film is, here's the frame, here's the penguin doing its thing. And in a way, what we wanted to do was expand the frame and feel us filming the penguin doing its thing, and feel this interaction between the human and the penguin, but also the camera and the human and the penguin. And somehow between that triangle of, I mean, not that there are any penguins in our film, I should say moose instead of penguin, I'm just confusing everyone. But in a way, that triangular relationship between the technology, us filming, and the moose or whatever it is that we are filming, creates a new meaning and creates something that actually takes David's work into a different arena too. And I think this new layer that is created by this human presence actually makes us, whether consciously or unconsciously, bring our current human situation and our current sort of sense of being these semi-bionic human beings who constantly have phones attached to their arms and constantly have gizmos around them, whether it's this or computers or whatever. This is who we are as humans now, right? So, you know, not to acknowledge that, and not to acknowledge that we were using the very tools of technology to ask questions about how much technology has affected or limited our perspective on what's around us. As you know, that seemed very, very crucial. But I think one thing that's very important to sort of highlight is that there's also for us a sense, and I think particularly for Peter, a sense of technology and filming itself taking us to some kind of almost transcendental experience of the natural world. And in a way, the very framing of it and the very engagement of it with the camera, you can tell for Peter, it kind of is he keeps the mystery intact. He doesn't try and define the mystery. So we have shots in our film, like this 3-minute shot of a tree that's just, you know, moving in the wind. And part of the mystery of the shot is the tree, but a part of the mystery of the shot is also us looking at the tree. And the film contains the act of us looking. And I think as a result, it is a constantly alive thing, I hope. I mean, that's certainly the aim of it. Yeah, so I think the paradox is crucial and fascinating. I think we weren't ever trying to create a kind of Garden of Eden where nature was one thing and us human beings was something else. It was always this interplay. And the other thing just to say is that the film is filmed in the Grand Teton National Park in America, which in itself is a bit of a paradox because it is this illusory pristine landscape where buffalo roam and elk are, and yet, you know, in a way it's a bit like a theme park if you're there, in that there are these roads that go through, and you know, we're part of it obviously with our cameras, and you know, trailer after trailer of people get out with these huge cameras, and it feels like this thing of the great spectacle of the natural world has become, in a way, part of our relationship with it now. Is nature as spectacle, nature as entertainment, nature as yeah. I mean, it's mind-boggling, really, and I don't think we are ever in any kind of way trying to answer it in the film. And I think the other thing to say is that we're very conscious we're part of it. We're not above it.
Okay, maybe to avoid this confusion, maybe it's time to watch a part of the film. Maybe maybe someone still didn't watch them. Maybe it's just a part, just an episode to understand better what we are talking about.
Yeah, maybe if we have a look at the first excerpt, that would be great.
Okay, let's try.
I had this idea that we could somehow engage with nature more fully through coming here and making a film. Nature is a tricky word. One that seems to separate us from it. How can I see this mountain more clearly? Somehow by bringing David's words and Peter's vision together, I thought we could find a clue. Right now, I'm just thinking about bears. And eyes other than our own.
Peter, were these talking about here?
Probably, yeah. Let me just check it. Whoa.
Yeah. Did you hear that growl? Did you hear that, Peter?
No.
I'm not joking, it was a growl. Did you heard it, Jordan?
Okay, we're ready to go.
It was a very clear growl.
David, did you make a growling sound?
Okay, David?
If I notice a raven soaring overhead, I allow my gaze to be fixed on that feathered body for more than a few moments, following it with my focus as the bird swoops and dives. And sometimes I will feel in my muscles something of that glide. I mean, if I were just a little mind housed inside my head, then yeah, it'd be impossible to really know anything about the experience of another animal. But what if this awareness I call me is distributed throughout my entire organism? And isn't this even more true for other animals who are so much more active than we are. Aren't they thinking with the whole of their bodies? When I gaze at another creature, watching as it moves, my nervous system is synapsed through my senses to its nervous system. And so my awareness is in direct contact with its awareness.
Okay, thank you. So we can continue this topic about the nature. So you said in the film that nature is a tricky word. It is, and you try to show the complicated of nature form from different perspectives. You used close-ups and some abstract images and bird gaze in some other episodes. And I feel that it is an attempt to avoid our human gaze on nature. But how do you think, do we need and do we have a chance to avoid this human gaze or to decrease it in this conversation about nature and all its complicated forms?
So I hope I'm answering your question when I say, you know, the human gaze is the only gaze that we have. We just have to find a way of being humble with it, and you know, how can film allow that humility, and maybe slowing down a bit, taking time to watch, but also acknowledging our presence. I mean, when I look at that clip, and I'm aware that we also because this says it's a talk on editing, maybe I should just say that, you know, we use the structure of the journey obviously as an editing device, and the journey to the Grand Teton Park was something that we did 3 times in order to create this coherence. And so we were trying to look at nature within that space, but there's also the sense that in a way, you know, we're looking at ourselves. We're part of that, and so by including this shot of the boulder and the us holding the tripod and the camera, we look like very strange animals when I look at that. What strange animals us human beings are, that we need to try and interpret everything and find meaning, and you know, we're always looking for something. And when I look at these busy little filmmakers, I mean, now I see a certain sort of poignancy in it, a certain sort of pathos that, you know, the human animal has its own mechanism, as well as the snail, as well as the moose. And part of its mechanism is that it's in its head all the time, the human animal. And we were very keen to try and create a film that wasn't just in the head, it was an experiential journey. And here was yet again the paradox that we're using ideas to try and go beyond ideas, and David's using words to try and go beyond words. And so in a way, part of the challenge, both in terms of the actual filming, but also in terms of the edit, was to constantly try to refine and create something that would become an inner experience for an audience, and not something that they were just trying to grapple with these ideas on an intellectual level. So going back to this notion of filming nature, I mean, that was really one of our key criteria was, and anyway, it's the way that Peter is that he, as I said, films from a very embodied way. And I think in that edit, you heard that we actually deliberately tried to keep in the sound of the tripod creaking and the feet on the forest floor of Peter as he was walking. And the words also tried to bring us into the process and the process of making. And any of you who've ever tried to write voiceover will know that it's the most annoying thing to have to do as a filmmaker, because it's so hard to get right. And you know, it's only at the very end that we put in this voiceover that really tried to clearly lay out what we were trying to do in the film. And of course it goes off into all many different spaces after that, but at that stage that was what we were really trying to get across. Yeah, so I think that this part of the film shows this need for this clear trajectory in order to then go more crazy. And I think as an edit we begin very much with this clear journey in the Grand Teton part, and then I think the film gets more and more abstract, but the clarity is needed in order to take off.
I want to remind the audience to send us their questions, and Emma will answer them at the end of our show. You mentioned about this method we used in editing and in how to make this film the whole whole form. In your film, you also use a lot of Abrams words and your own words, but I would like you to ask what was your approach to convert this complicated philosophical statement of Abrams to film language? Did you have a goal maybe to create some more art form, like film art film, or to be careful and to keep Abrams words, Abrams ideas, and to illustrate them with these images?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't think we ever wanted just to illustrate his words, because it feels like that's not really an interesting place for film to go. I think the whole idea was what would happen if his ideas met a film process, and what that would become a new whole, which was neither you know, I think that's also the thing that certainly interests Peter and I about collaboration, is that in a way nobody owns this either. We all kind of serve this thing, and nobody really quite, which is really complicated. So I think what we were really trying to do was not create an illustration in any way of David's ideas, but to create a space of inquiry where his ideas and the film and our voiceover creates some kind of other space that creates other connections in the audience's mind, and hopefully brings them into their own internal dialogue. And how you create this internal, how you make the audience have this sense of it being part of their own experience and part of the zeitgeist in the world, I think is the thing that interests us. And maybe it's appropriate to show the pitching trailer, because I mean, I don't know if that's okay, Alexander, to move on to that now, but maybe one thing just to highlight is that we went to the Grand Teton part with David.
Mm-hmm.
It was an experiment. We went for a couple of weeks, 1 year, and we brought the cameras, we brought David's books, we brought lots of food, we lived in a cabin together, and we found ourselves kind of by default, in a way, filming David presenting his ideas, probably a bit in a way that wasn't entirely the kind of form of film that I think we wanted to make. But it seemed important to nail the ideas, both for him and for us. But that then created some other kind of structural limitation for the film, because when we came to edit, the last thing we wanted was somebody standing in front of the camera just presenting their ideas. And in fact, the clip that you've just seen is the only time that he actually really stands in front of camera and presents his ideas. Apart from that, we use him as a kind of voice in the audience's head. So when we came back with all the footage, one of the things that Peter and I had to work out is this a film? And maybe it's a question for all of us at certain stages of the process. And I guess what I would like to put forward is that increasingly for me, an edit is not something that happens at the end of filming, but happens at different stages throughout filming to give you a clue as to what the film is. And certainly because we were also collaborating, it was really important that we understood together that we were making the same film, but that also we were convinced enough that it could be a film. So having worked together in the Grand Teton Park, we came back and Peter and I edited together for a while with the footage that we had. And when we edited David presenting the ideas, it felt like, no, that's not quite right. And there was an opportunity to present a pitching trailer at CPH Docs. And we decided, okay, we'll use this as a goal to see if we can put together something that communicates to us what we want the film to be. And gradually we kind of honed down some of David's ideas and put them over just 1 or 2 or 3 very simple shots. And when we saw that, we felt, yeah, that's the film we want to make. And I think that for me is a big clue in editing, that actually trying to find the DNA of the film is part of the task of the edit. And I wanted just to show this trailer, which people don't normally see. So I think you'll understand when you see it that it's not a trailer for the film to sell the film, but it was a pitching trailer, which we presented at CPH Docs in Copenhagen to funders. But more than anything, we presented to each other to make sure that this was the film we were making. So maybe we could have a look at that.
Yeah, let's watch it.
It's kind of wild witnessing this outrageous proliferation of technology right at the same moment, at the same time that there's such a fraying and fragmentation within the Earth's various ecosystems. So many species being squeezed out of existence. And I can't help but wonder, what is the real relation between these two contemporaneous happenings? It's weird to listen to so many of the inventors in Silicon Valley who are all so dizzy and drunk on their image of this bright and dazzling future where human consciousness is finally able to download itself from this problematic body into better hardware that will enable a kind of immortality to the human species. As we humans are spending more and more time entranced by our artifacts, caught up in the dazzle of the digital screen it enables us not to notice, not to feel what's really going on. But at the same time, I think we become aware of it on the periphery as we glance at the news, as we hear, you know, little bits and catch glimpses of what's going on in the body's world, which is really the earth. And it stuns us with the intensity of the losses and the breakages. If we were to really turn our gaze toward the real in its wonder, open our senses back up to what's unfolding in the land and the earth, it would be too painful. So we'd hang out in those more virtual spaces and really lock the doors and close ourselves in ever more thoroughly into that circuit of exchange with these mirrors of our own invention.
I really like this trailer, and especially this episode in the end when Buffalo's on the road. He's just staying, and all the cars also need to stay, to stop and to wait while he's there. Maybe it's time to ask about some environmentalist question, because I really want to know how David and maybe you after this film have maybe some ideas how to change this current condition when the nature is still as an object of not only of our romantic observation, but also with huge technological exploitation and economical exploitation. How can we deal with it? And did you look for these answers in your films and in this film?
It's such an important question. I think we tend to approach our filmmaking a wee bit with the idea that we're not really looking for the answers, but we want a debate. We want the film to provoke a debate, or to provoke questions, or to provoke a sensibility. I remember on one screening, actually, there's a few screenings that I can think of that might kind of respond to what you've said. And one of them was more or less at the beginning of when Extinction Rebellion started, this big movement. And there'd been a huge Extinction Rebellion march that day, and the film was showing actually in Glasgow. And a lot of people came from the march directly to the film. And one of them, who was a long campaigner, said, "You know, I'm so weary of campaigning. You know, when I look at the film, I'm wondering whether it's the right way," or something like that. And certainly that's not what we're trying to get the film to ask. But one thing that we began to talk about was the need to remain in communication with what's around while it's around. The need not to become so despairing and so angry that we lose touch with what makes us human in the first place, which is everything round about us. And that full sensorial and embodied communication, I think, is something that, in a way, the film tries to celebrate and tries to. I mean, I'm sort of saying this to myself because I think so many times I can end up on this Zoom world all the time and just forget. And you know, I found this article in The Guardian yesterday. I don't know if any of you've read it, but apparently call centre staff face being watched working at home. I mean, you know, we really have entered such a dystopian world where technology is really used for control in just ways that go beyond George Orwell's imagination. And I think that it's so important that this world that we really are part of is at the foreground of our experience. This world of sky and of water and of everything. And indeed of the computer, but not that the computer controls us. So maybe it's just getting things in perspective. But I really don't have answers, Alexander. I think there are so many more people that have thought much more rigorously about this over the years than me. But I'm certainly thinking that film is a space to engage with the questions and to engage with them on that sensuous and embodied way. Yeah, so I think I feel that quite strongly, and I think also the other thing just to say is film is a living entity. And
Yeah.
One time we presented this film in Germany, and at the end the audience were quite quiet actually, and kind of taking in their experience, and somebody put up their hand and said, "What about the animals? What's their perspective in this film?" or something, which was kind of real off-kilter question. I didn't know how to answer it. But the interviewer said, well, maybe they have something to say, because look, and just at that moment, this mouse was running around the screen of the cinema, which was an incredible moment. So who knows?
Okay, I see that we have some questions from the audience. So if you're ready, we can start with this question. Anastasia Sarapina asks us, do you think, Emma, an editor can sometimes be more important than a director in documentary film?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think, you know, you see the importance of editors in structuring a whole kind of way of thinking. I mean, an edit for me is not about solving footage. It's about proposing a way of thinking about work. And, you know, I tend to like to edit my own work, but just to say, it was very much Peter and I together that edited this. And, you know, in the final edit, I would feed in scenes, and Peter would have the whole edit and be making it into this musical composition, which is very much what his work is. But I also work with editors, and in answer to your question, the sooner an editor can become part of the process, I think the better. And I think if you see some of the work that's being presented internationally, whether it's active killing or whatever it is, you see the importance of an editor coming quite early into the process and actually provoking a certain approach to the film. So yeah, I mean, edit for me is contained in every moment of the film. And you see the way that Peter films, he's filming with the edit in mind all the time. You know, the length of shots, where he's moving the camera, the edit is contained in everything. Oh, have I frozen, or is Alexander frozen? Oh, I think we have
As a language, as I remember the film. But you use also a lot of extra sounds as a level of the film. So it is very interesting to ask about the sound of the film. And Alina Gorlova also writes us, could you please tell more about examples of working with sound during the editing, and how is it possible to create your own separate story in the mind of the viewer with the help of sound? I think it's also a very interesting question.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think You're right. I mean, sound is what creates that embodied, visceral experience as an audience. But I think it's also a mistake if sound is trying to just illustrate what we see. So for me, the sound was also just another imaginary layer that was to play to our inner world, not something that was just to say, so you see a waterfall, let's hear the sound of a waterfall. You know, if sound could be used to take you into an inner state, that was really what we tried to do, both with the Foley and with the sound edit, because, you know, we had to use... Filming animals is so complicated because there is no sound. I mean, we saw the shot of the snail. That's not the sound a snail makes. It sounds more like a Star Wars creature than a snail. So, you know, all sorts of interesting sounds were created. But, you know, the film begins in a world of sound. It begins in the dark, where you hear these elk. And part of David's whole approach is that if we could really listen to what's around us, we would be hearing something that's communicating with us all the time in many different ways. So we tried to make the film have that sense of kind of this multi-sensorial communication that was always trying to get into this body of the audience. And I think the way that I see the audience as a receptor of film is very much as to receiving it in that embodied way. And obviously then the words work as part of that, and the music works as part of that, and it becomes this musical kind of composition, but also this composition with meaning, where, you know, the words at the beginning might be quite literal and quite trying to tell you what the journey is about in terms of the voiceover, but gradually we wanted the words to become more associative. Yeah.
Okay, so Emma, we have just 8 minutes. Would you like to show the last episode, or maybe
I wonder if we should show just a little bit. I don't know. How long is the last one? Yeah, maybe we should show it, and maybe I could say something just before about it instead, just in case we run out of ideas. And maybe one thing just to say about this is taking it on in terms of an editing methodology from the bit where we saw what we'd begun to work with on the pitching trailer, was this idea of David's words as a kind of inner voice and using shots over a long period of time. I think what you see is some of those ideas are then taken on in the actual edit, where we have this we're using basically the camera from a car, which you can see is really, I mean, there's lots of ideas contained in that shot, but it's also a very simple shot. And by using one simple shot over an extended period of time with David's voice, I think it allows our own associations to come in. And this question of how the film can occupy that space is the one that really interests us all. Not the space that is either just David's words or the film, but our inner world. So yeah, let's have a look at it.
Okay.
In engaging so many of our technologies, we are reflected back to ourselves. That is, the technologies intervene between our sensing bodies and the sensuous earth in such a way that we begin interacting with the technology and forgetting that there is a wider, more than just human world. And yet, the technologies originate as tools helping us to make contact with or engage that wider than human world. Our organism is still yearning to feel what it's like to live in a world filled with intelligence. And so our way of trying to get there, to recreate that experience, involves outfitting digital interfaces into every built item of our world. Ubiquitous computing.
Imagine that you have 0 cookies and you split them evenly among 0 friends.
Natural language user interfaces programmed to talk back to us. Sometimes it does seem as though our technologies are just trying to mimic that ancient, oral, animistic cosmos we once inhabited.
the question from the audience as well. So Mariana Yaremchichina asks us, where did the title come from? I think the title from the book, or the book.
Yeah,
Not the film. Does it refer to human animals forgetting that they are animals and therefore needing to become animals to get a more empathic and sensual perception of the environment?
I think so. That's what seems right to me. We are animals after all. We're part of that animal world. I mean, obviously the term came originally, I think, from Deleuze, but I don't think that's necessarily what David was referencing. But it's a great challenge, becoming animal, becoming animal again. We've never really stopped, but just reminding ourselves to stay animal. And interestingly, just to say, the clip that you just saw, I think, is technology becoming more animal, because it goes from, the camera is part of the car. The camera then becomes actually attached to a raven. This was this incredible raven that we found that apparently appears in David Attenborough documentary. So it's also our homage to David Attenborough, that this bird carries this camera. And so it's a sense also of the miracle of technology, that we can maybe try to empathize with the animal experience, and from that hopefully behave differently. So hopefully it can also affect our way of being.
Emma, thank you very much for this conversation and for the great film. Everyone can see it on DocuSpace.org website. You are welcome to watch it, please. I think our conversation helps us to understand this film, and after this watching will be easier, and maybe you understand more.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Alexander. It's so interesting to talk to you, and thank you all for attending this, and happy viewing for the rest of the festival.
Yeah, thank you, Festival Docu Days. Have a great festival.
Days.
Bye to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Alexander.